Alright, today we're going to be talking about the Minuteman load. We're going to be talking about the different ways of pulling the Minuteman load. If you have a top load engine like this, the old Quantum style, or what we were referring to as the puck, which is the impelled chassis, the new style chassis, anything with the puck that has a tray, we're going to be going over the tray pulls for the Minuteman load. Just some terminology really quick, what we're talking about today. When we talk about cross lays, it's not exactly the flat load that we're referring to. Cross lays is any one of our hose loads that goes across the engine, okay? From one side to the other, normally over the pump or right in front of the pump if it's one of the pucks. Okay, that's a cross lay. So when we talk about cross lays, you either have a flat load or a Minuteman load. So today we're going over all the Minuteman load options and deployments that we have. First off, all the top load engines for a pre-connect have a pre-connect at the bottom of the Minuteman load. When we have the trays on the puck style engines, the pre-connect is at the top, on top of the supply section. So first thing we're going to do is go over all the different pulls of how to pull the Minuteman load off the engine for either the top load engine or the trays. We're going to go over 5 different ways of pulling it. The first way is an onside pull. When we refer to onside pull, we're talking about where the nozzle is located in relation to the Minuteman load itself. So right here on the engineer side of this top load engine, we have an onside pull for cross lane number 1. We have an offside pull for cross lane number 2. We'll go over the onside pull first, then we'll go over the offside pull, then we'll go over an alley pull. We'll go over an alley pull for the top loaded engines, and then we'll go over the trays. Onside pull for the tray and offside pull for the tray. That's what we're going to go over for all 5 of those pulls. And then following that, in this video, we'll talk about the different deployments of the Minuteman load. Once you have the shoulder load on your shoulder, we're going to talk about 5 different ways to deploy that Minuteman load. The first one being the reverse. The second one being a reverse 180, which is something we'll explain and talk about. It's just a one more tactic for you to get the job done efficiently. We're going to talk about the accordion forward, as spoken about in the revised hose lay manual. All right, sorry about the noise that we have going on here, but the 5 different deployments that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about deploying the Minuteman load off of your shoulder, the reverse that it talks about in the revised hose lay manual. We're going to talk about one other tactic called the reverse 180, which allows us to deploy that reverse in just a little bit more efficiently. We're going to talk about the accordion forward. We're going to talk about the coupling reverse, and then we're going to talk about the coil. Okay, so we'll go over each one of those after we go over the pulls. So first thing we're going over today is pulling off the Minuteman load. If you have an onside pull from a top loaded engine, just recognize what you're going to see as you come up to this engine. When you see this strap of hose right here, that means this is the nozzle. You don't have the same thing here. We'll talk about the offside pull here in a second. But right here, you know that you have the onside pull. You have your attack section, which goes onto your shoulder. You have your supply section, which has 2 bites so that you can fit your gloved fingers through those bites and pull the supply section off. Firefighter Sandoval is going to help by demonstrating as we talk about each step of pulling this off the engine. But first thing, as he comes up and he sees that he wants to pull cross lane number 1, it's an onside pull. He's going to give both sections a little pull off of it. Go ahead and do that. He's going to pull both sections out just a little bit. And then he's going to pull the shoulder load onto his shoulder. We always want to pull this the same way onto our right shoulder, no matter what. If you're pulling offside or onside, it's always going to go onto your shoulder for muscle memory. No matter which engine you come up to, we deploy it the same exact way, so we're going to pull it off the engine the same way. As you can see, he hasn't pulled it all the way off the engine yet. The mistake that we sometimes make is we want to turn and pull the supply load before we have the entire shoulder load off the engine. The problem with that is that if you turn too early, this whole section right here will get caught up on your bottle as you pull it off the engine. So first thing you want to do after you get it onto your shoulder is advance forward until you feel the entire shoulder load come off the engine. With the entire shoulder load off the engine, none of these folds behind you are caught up on your bottle. Now you can take a step back, reach back with your left hand and grab those 2 bites and pull the supply load off the engine. Okay, as you can see, he has maintained the integrity of his shoulder load by keeping his right hand on the nozzle, regardless of if he has a strap or a paracord around the shoulder load. He's maintained all these folds in line as he pulled it off the engine, and then he would advance towards his target. All right, so now we're gonna go over the exact same thing, only if you were pulling cross lane number 2 from the engineer's side, it's an offside pull. So the nozzle isn't over here, it looks backwards, but the difference is we are going to stay facing the pump panel and feed this shoulder load back onto our shoulder so that when you step away and you advance towards your target, that nozzle will still be in your right hand and everything will deploy the exact same way as it did for the onside pull. So as we come up to an offside pull, we can see it's a little different. We are still going to pull both sides of this Minuteman load out a little bit and then feed this attack section onto our shoulder. And there's a couple other little tips and tricks that we can go over as Firefighter Sandoval does that. So he's stepping up to it. He's pulling both sections out just a little bit. Now he's taking the attack section and feeding it back onto his shoulder. As he does that, he starts to grab the nozzle. He has a top section that's connected to his supply section. He's gonna take that and flip it behind his helmet. You see how he did that? The section of hose that's connected to the supply was in front of his face. All he did was flip it behind him. So now as he grabs the 2 bites on the supply section, he can advance towards his target and everything looks and feels exactly the same way as when he pulled it from the onside pull. He's still got his supply section in his left hand. He still has the nozzle in his right hand. He's maintained the integrity of this shoulder load by keeping the folds in line. And even if there was a paracord or strap, it would deploy the exact same way from the offside pull. All right, so now that we've gone over the normal single person pull on the onside and the single person pull on the offside, we're going to show you what is an available option if your engineer can pull the supply load or dump load, or the second firefighter can pull the supply load, doing an alley pull with the top load engine. Just remember, you can do an alley pull with the Minuteman load off of the trays or the top load engine. It works the same way either way. We'll show it to you step by step. Realize that this will be done simultaneously, even though Firefighter Sandoval and I will be pulling one at a time, just to show in the video what one person is doing and then what the other person is doing. But it will happen at the same time, just like the alley pull works with the flat load. All right, so first things first, Firefighter Sandoval can still come up and pull both sections out just a little bit. Now me as the engineer, I'm coming around to the side, and while he pulls the attack section onto his shoulder, just like we showed for the normal pull, I'm pulling the supply section with my gloved hands as the engineer or second firefighter. Now I have to remember that my top bite is connected to his shoulder load, so I don't want to pull hose off of his shoulder. I just want to make sure to clear the hose bed since we have such a straight shot to our door. So first things first, I'm going to pull the supply section out. I'm going to go towards the rear of the bed. It's going to hook pretty early, and it's already indicated that I have the hose bed cleared. I can drop that section and continue to stretch this out. Okay, now this section is completely flaked out. Firefighter Sandoval doesn't have to worry about it. Now he can advance all the way up to the door Go ahead. And deploy his shoulder load however he sees fit. All right, that's good. We'll go over deployments here in a moment. I wanted to show you the alley pull because it's just one more option. The engineer has to wait till he's ready for water anyways. He might as well pull the supply load for him. It's just one less thing for the firefighter to worry about. All right, so the next thing we're gonna go over is what the revised hose-lay manual says as a puck style chassis. It's actually a puck configuration, and this chassis is an impel chassis, but it has the trays. When it talks about puck chassis, we're just talking about any engine, quantum or impel, that has a tray. That's all we're getting at. If the pull is off of a tray, the pre-connect is at the top of the supply section instead of the bottom when we were pulling off of the top load engines. So as we roll this up, now we've got our cross lays, which are laid across right behind the pump. And now we have our 2 3/4 inch cross lays, number 1 and number 2, in trays in the Minuteman style. So when you have these 2 bites for your supply section, as you look at this, the pre-connect is actually above it on the top instead of at the bottom. So the supply will still pull the same way, but you just have to know that the connection, this hose that's connected to your attack, is coming off the bottom. And then the pre-connect to the engine is at the top of your supply. That's the only difference here. It should still deploy the same way. It's gonna be a little bit lower, a little bit closer to your shoulder. So depending on if you're shorter, this helps you. If you're taller, it might hurt you because you gotta dip up under it. We'll show you, it's the exact same pulls as we did over there. The only difference when you come and look at the offside pull is that now you do have a strap of hose in the front. It kind of goes at an angle because this hose is what's connecting your supply to your attack. On this offside pull, this is your attack. It looks the same as the other one, but now we have this hose strap here, not indicating your nozzle, indicating this is where it's connected from the supply to the attack. Okay, that's the only difference here when you come and look at it. So Firefighter Sandoval is gonna pull the onside pull first. It's cross lane number 1. As you roll up the door and you come and look at it, you don't necessarily need to pull both sections out a little bit. You still can, but it's so close for you to be able to grab these bites with your gloves that you only need to grab your attack section. Okay, we're gonna have him pull from the bottom here because sometimes the way it's connected like this on top, that top fold sometimes needs to stay in the tray so that it doesn't pull your supply section out with it. So he's gonna pull from the nozzle onto his shoulder just like he did before, and then he's gonna pull the entire section out like he did last time, and then he's going to reach back. We don't wanna get any of these folds caught up on our bottles. That hurts our deployment. So you wanna make sure you have the entire section out before you reach back and grab your supply. Go ahead. So again, he's maintaining his folds in the front. He's gonna pull it all the way out of the bed. That way his folds don't hang over his bottle. All his folds are right behind him next to his bottle. He's made sure to leave a little bit of the section above, otherwise it would have been pulling his supply section out with it. So now he can step back and with his left hand, grab his bites and pull his supply. And everything is pulled just like it did off of the top load engine. He's able to maintain his nozzle and his folds in front of him, and he has his supply and his entire tray is cleared of hose. That's the onside pull of the tray. Okay, next we're gonna be going over the offside pull for the trays. That's the impel chassis, which has a puck. Okay, and that's any of our engines or trucks that have a tray. This is what we're going over. It's easy to get confused and think that this is the nozzle. Just realize where you're pulling from. The number 2 cross lay on the engineer side is going to be your offside pull. Okay, So this is your nozzle section. You know that because you have your little bite down here. This will still be your supply section because you have 2 bites on this side. So as you come up to it, you can keep this to the left, pull this from the bottom, and again, just like on the top load engine, you're gonna be feeding it onto your shoulder until you can get a hold of that nozzle, maintain your shoulder load, flip the hose behind your head, and then grab your supply and pull it off the engine. Okay, ready? So he's pulling the attack section, trying to maintain all those folds so that he can feed it onto his shoulder. Then he can take that top fold and flip it over his head. Just like he did last time, he's going to grab his nozzle, maintain that with his right hand. Then he can reach back, grab the 2 bites on the supply, and pull that supply section out of the tray. Normally the bites will be a little bit bigger than that. Everything is pulled out of the tray. You can see how it's connected, pre-connected at the top. He can either continue to advance with his supply, or at least now we have the exact same pull of what you saw, an offside pull on the top load versus this is an offside pull off of the tray. Okay, now that we've got the shoulder load and the dump load or supply load off of the engine, we're going to talk about 5 different ways to deploy the shoulder load. The first of those 5 ways is going to be the reverse. Okay, in the revised Hosley manual, it talks about the V-split reverse. It's the exact same thing. We're going to do a straight forward reverse, and as we advance to our target, we're going to call that little corridor over there our target. What I want you to understand is with the second tactic that we go over here today, we're going to talk about flaking out our hose in a manner that will give us an S pattern every single time. It's okay for us to pull hose as long as it's attack over supply for them to cross over each other. But sometimes in the middle of the night, when you've got obstacles and grass and you're starting to flake out your hose, it can get confusing when you start to pull some hose over other hose. And so I have some tips and tricks for us to focus on so that every time we're not pulling hose over more hose. And it's very simple 2-second maneuvers that we can do to keep our hose flaked out and to keep our Minuteman deployed in less than a minute. So the first one's just a straightforward. In this case, when you look back, your supply is going to be to the right. And that's what's going to dictate whether or not we do a turn at the door or whether or not we deploy it in a normal fashion. I'll go over more of that in a second, but for this, it's just the normal reverse. You deploy it from the target door and reverse out as you flake out your hose. So as we advance towards where we're going, he's got his supply in his hand with his 2 bites. He's got his shoulder load on his shoulder. As it tugs, he's going to let go of the entire supply. And then he can turn towards his target. All right, pull up right here. What you can notice as he advances towards his target is the most important thing, he keeps his right hand on the nozzle. If he had a strap or a paracord, it would have kept this entire integrity anyways. But he's going to do this because no matter if we have a paracord or a strap or nothing, it should always be deployed the same way. He's maintained the integrity of his folds. Everything stays in line. It's going to be super important for when we lay down this Minuteman load at our destination and reverse out. So he sees where he's going. A few feet before his destination, he's going to stop and switch his hand placement. Let's go ahead and take a few steps forward. Okay, right about here, he's going to switch his hand placement. As you can see, he went from his right hand being over all these folds to now having these folds exposed. He's going to be setting this entire shoulder load down on the ground to his right. If his right hand was over those folds and he set it down, he'd have to move his hand from outside those folds. And what happens a lot of times is all these folds get twisted up. So make sure you switch your hand placement before you set it down. You'll see him set it down. What you can see here is behind his back, these folds can get twisted up. But the great thing is that firefighter Sandoval has maintained the integrity of this shoulder load by keeping all his folds intact here. If he had a strap or a paracord, he could undo that right now, but his next step will be to move his nozzle out of the way. With his nozzle out of the way, all of his folds are right in line, and if we were to split this, he would be splitting these two sections to take these folds and reverse out from his destination, from the fire door. That's what we're doing here, and that's why we call it a V-split. He's not actually splitting it out of his shoulder in this case, but it's the same exact principles applied. He's taking these two sections of his load, which essentially make 50 feet and 50 feet. He's splitting them and grabbing two folds in between both of those sections. And he's reversing out away from the fire structure. He's gonna give it a few shakes. Now, hold on right there. Now that he's come all the way back to a point of pulling the nozzle just a little bit, you can see that he already has an S pattern. He's got all his hose flaked out. He doesn't have to keep making shuttle runs back and forth from the nozzle back to hit this point here. Now he can drop his loops, come all the way back up. He doesn't necessarily need to grab the coupling, but at least the middle bite. Bring that and the nozzle up to the fire door, and he's ready for water. As you can see, in this deployment, his supply goes to the right. Our engine is to the right. When you have a shoulder load on your shoulder, the supply is at the top of your shoulder load. The nozzle is at the bottom. As he switches his hand placement and places it on the ground, his supply, everything goes to the right, back to the engine. From his shoulder load to his supply to the engine, we have a perfect S pattern all the way back. No attack over supply in this case. We'll go over a little bit more of that when we go over the reverse 180 maneuver. Okay, so we've done the reverse at one door. We're gonna give you another situation where you could do one quick maneuver to make sure that all your hose flakes out in an S pattern without any hose over the other hose. This is the same exact setup. We're gonna do a reverse, and so he's gonna maintain the integrity of his folds here. He's got his two bites that he just pulled off the engine. And the situation, just remember that in everything we're talking about today, this is all situation, okay? We're giving you what is a normal situation for you to come up to a building that's this far away from the engine, with the front door right here. It's only about 60, 70 feet away from the engine. If you're coming up, you wanna bring as much hose as possible with you. You're gonna advance until you can't bring any more supply with you. What I talked about in the last deployment is where your supply was in relation to where you lay out your Minuteman shoulder load. In this case, he's gonna keep it in his left hand, bringing up as much hose as possible, and then he deploys it off his right shoulder. So in this case, his supply is going to be to his left instead of the last scenario where his supply was to his right. So what we're going to do in this situation that's different is after he goes up to the fire door, he's going to make a quick 180 turn and then lay down his Minuteman shoulder load away from the door. It still flakes out the same way in a reverse, but what you will see is by making that 180 turn, he has switched where his nozzle is positioned in relation to his supply. By doing that, you've allowed yourself to flake out your hose in an S pattern with no confusion, no matter how dark it is outside, no matter what the obstacles in the way. All right, let's go ahead and advance towards our door. Okay, here at the fire door, go ahead and hold. Here at the fire door, where you would normally lay down your shoulder load if you're just doing a normal reverse, now he's going to take a quick 180 turn and he's going to still maintain his folds, switch his hand placement like he did before, and lay down his hose away from the fire door. Now, as you can see, he still has all his folds in a row. He still has his nozzle in place. He'll still be able to pull from the folds that he maintained. No matter what happens back here behind by your bottle, gets all twisted up, it doesn't matter. You can always pull a reverse from the folds that you maintain. So go ahead and move your nozzle out of the way. Grab the 2 folds that you want and reverse out. He's gonna walk back up just as he did before, grabbing his middle bite and his nozzle, and he's ready for water. As you can see, he now has from right to left the nozzle and all the hose in an S pattern leading back to the engine. It took him maybe 1 second to turn around and deploy it in the same manner that he did in the first place. But what he has gained by taking the extra second to turn around and deploy his Minuteman shoulder load is allowed him to flake out all his hose in an S pattern with no hose being dragged over other hose. What can happen, as we've seen through hundreds of reps in this last rookie school, is as we continually pull attack against supply, the hose gets tangled up, it gets twisted up, and then you spend more time trying to fix something rather than having this be deployed in less than a minute every single time. We are taking 1, maybe 2 seconds to make the difference in having this neat S pattern all the way back to our engine. It's something that we can use almost every single time. As long as our supply is on the left, turn around, deploy your shoulder load, and it flakes out in a perfect S pattern every single time. So that's the reverse 180 as opposed to the reverse. The next thing we're gonna go over is a coupling reverse. All right, the next deployment of the Minuteman load is going to be another reverse. But as it talks about in the revised hose lay manual, we have a coupling reverse. It's almost the same exact thing that we were doing before, only now if for whatever reason you weren't able to maintain your folds, or you just feel more comfortable with this, it is doing a reverse, but now you'll just be grabbing the coupling and flaking it out that way. The drawback to this method is that you have to travel twice as far than if you were to just grab your 2 folds like we did a moment ago. But you'll see it's the same deployment. He's going to lay down his shoulder load, and now he's going to move his nozzle out of the way, grab the coupling, and then he's going to bring the coupling all the way back and then all the way back up to the nozzle. So let's go ahead and start advancing. He's got his supply in the left hand. Go ahead and drop it down. His supply is done. He's going to his target off in this direction. His supply is to his right. So as he advances towards, he'll still lay down his shoulder load like he did in the first video. Switching his hand placement. Right hand on the bottom, left hand on the nozzle. Now in this case, it doesn't even matter if you didn't maintain your folds. Sometimes it's not going to be a perfect laydown every single time. If these end up getting twisted up, it's okay. You can revert to the coupling reverse by grabbing a coupling. Go ahead. Move the nozzle, grab the coupling, and then walk it out. As he walks it out, he can do a quick whip. And then, as he advances back towards the nozzle, he'll come down the middle so that he doesn't cross up his hose. He wants that S pattern, if at all possible. He brings the coupling up, brings the nozzle up, and he can see from here his coupling to his supply. He has 100 feet at the door. That's the coupling reverse. It's useful if you've twisted up your shoulder load, if you've dropped it and you don't know where to go from there. Grab a coupling, run it back, run back up. You should have a perfect S pattern. That's one of the many benefits to this load. One of the many benefits to having it loaded up in an accordion fashion. Perfect S pattern all the way back to the engine. Very quickly, before we go over the accordion forward as read in the Horseshoe manual, we're going to talk about just making horseshoe loads. Horseshoe loads are a way of loading your shoulder load in a quick manner without having to reload the entire Minuteman load onto the engine every time you want to get some reps. So what we do in training is we make these horseshoe loads around our knees and then put the horseshoe load up on our shoulder, and that is your Minuteman shoulder load. The benefit to doing this is the amount of reps that you can crank out over and over and over again without needing 3 people to load the engine, without taking the time, 5 to 10 minutes sometimes if you're unfamiliar, to reload the Minuteman. And then again, you can get as many as 10, 20 reps in a matter of minutes. We've seen that especially in this last rookie school as we've done these horseshoe loads, going back and forth around the knees, leaving enough space so that you can get that nozzle back into position in accordion fashion, loading back and forth. We've been able to use this in training with the last rookie school. And as we made these horseshoe loads over and over again and tracking reps, we were able to get over 400 reps, 400 deployments of the Minuteman load in less than a week. We are maximizing our training. We're maximizing our efficiency. We are getting better at the job. It only takes one person. 2 people makes it that much easier. He's got his shoulder load. He's got his nozzle. He's maintaining the folds. And we're ready to go again. All right, the next deployment that we are going to go over of the Minuteman shoulder load is the accordion forward, as found in the revised Horseshoe manual. Okay, the forward deployment is when you have 50 feet or more of a straight shot from either the engine or the point of where you're at, from where you're at to the fire door. That's at least 50 feet from you to the fire door, no obstructions, no pinch points. If that's your case, you can deploy this in an accordion forward, which should still get you at least 50 feet to the door. This is very useful in apartment complexes, especially in small areas where as you enter the fire structure, you won't have more than 50 feet to go. Some of those small Division 1 apartments are perfect for this. If you really need to, you can always go back for another coupling to give you 100 feet at the door. So we're going to advance just like we did before with our supply in our left hand. We can drop our supply. Firefighter Sandoval is going to arrive at the rear of this engine and turn facing his target. With the target about 50 to 60 feet away, he can deploy an accordion forward. He knows there are no obstructions, no pinch points, no obstacles, no gates, no bushes, whatever. If you've got a straight shot, it's time to do the accordion forward. You keep your right hand on the nozzle, right to fight. You can bring the nozzle down. Don't let go of the nozzle here. Find the middle point of your shoulder load and grab it with your left hand. Now that you have that middle point, should be around the coupling, you can kick the shoulder load off your shoulder while maintaining your nozzle and your middle bite. Turn around, give it a shake. Now he's arrived at the door. He's ready for water. There were no shuttle runs. There was no wasted energy going back and forth trying to flake out the hose. With a straight shot like that and not very far to go interior, he's able to advance this line and flake it out on the way forward up to the fire. As you can see from the nozzle, we have about 50 feet here at the door. If he needed more, he can always go back for another coupling if needed. It's flaked out in an S pattern all the way back to the engine. No issues. All right, the last thing we're gonna go over today is called the coil or coil prop. We're not gonna prop it up like you saw in some of the pictures of the revised hose lay manual, but we're gonna show you the coil step by step, simple way for you to deploy it. It'll deploy the same way every time, and then we'll go over a couple of the principles of why it works the way it works, okay? This is basically making your shoulder load into an apartment load. That is all we are doing when we do the coil or coil pop. As you advance to your location, this is the situation that you might be in where you need this is some of the breezeways where you go up the stairs and you have a small space in which you need to deploy your shoulder load, and you might not have enough room for you to flake out in an S pattern. You might have to go down those stairs. Wherever you are in an alleyway, corridor, anywhere where an apartment load coil would be best used for you, that's what we're gonna do with our Minuteman shoulder load. So as you advance to your destination, let's go ahead and move forward. It deploys the same way as when we're doing the reverse. As we come up to our spot, that's good right there. You're going to switch your hand placement as you have done with your reverse. You're gonna lay down your shoulder load while maintaining those folds. You can see how Firefighter Sandoval kept all of his folds in line. That's what you need in order to make this work the way it needs to work. He's gonna do like he did with the reverse and move his nozzle out of the way. To make the coil, you bring your knees up to your hose right here. You're going to be putting your left hand out as a hanger for you to put the loops on, okay? With your folds that you maintain, this is where you're gonna make your coil right here. It's important to note while we have this, that when we make this, we want to make sure our nozzle ends up on top of our coil. That's why we start from the bottom section here, hanging the loops on our hand. We don't start from up here because that's where our supply is. We don't want our supply to be on top. So we start from the bottom here. He's gonna put his left hand out and he's gonna grab the bottom of each fold and hang the folds on his arm. Very simple. You just keep on loading them up on your left arm. After you've got your last fold on your left arm, you feed your right hand through next to your left hand, just like that. Then you stand up, you spread your arms out, give it a little shake if needed. You have your coil in your hands at this point. Your supply section here, and on top, your attack section. So now you're gonna step into your coil and lay it down in front of you. Essentially what we have now is our apartment load with the supply going back to the engine on the bottom and our nozzle, our attack section on top. Everything feeds out perfectly. Once we've got this charged, there are no kinks, there are no knots, and everything will feed into the structure just like we do when we pop the apartment load. And he's ready for water.